Okay, we're going to go back into training. This is actually take 2 on this video. I tried doing it this last weekend, but I didn't like the way it turned out. Now, first off, the shameless plug. As you see at the top of the board is the address for the Patreon channel. If you like what I do, come on over to Patreon. I try to post links to videos and other stuff that I think is valuable to know for training over there. It is for the most part free, so anyone can view it without having a Patreon account and without being a patron. You can click on it, play the videos and stuff, or link to the articles and read the articles or manuals or whatever I happen to link to that day. I try to post stuff every 2 to 3 days. That's the goal. And the goal is also to have somewhat of a topic that I'm covering for that particular week or 2 weeks. If you like what I do, you can become a patron. Kick me $1 or $2 or $7 or $13, whatever symbolic amount you come up with. It doesn't have to be the exact same amount as the recommendations on the levels. You can put in your own amount. So there are some videos over there that are patron only that you must become a patron of the channel in order to be able to view. You can also contact me on the back side over there, something YouTube used to do but they got rid of. So now back into the video here. Field training exercises. The reason I'm doing this is because I still get comments and contacted and stuff about this 3% unit that had this big multi-state exercise here recently, and how much of a circus slash fecal matter show it was. People are constantly contacting me about, well, did you see this part in the video? Did you see that? Did you see how unprofessional this was? How unprofessional that was? I know of this exercise. I did hear some of the planning on it before they conducted it and that stuff when I was part of the same national organization as this unit. And I've mentioned this a few times. They put more thought into where to park RVs and campers than they did in the training itself. And the other people that knew about this planning because they were hearing about it and stuff as it was going on, they're saying too that it seems like the actual training part of the exercise was kind of a secondary or a tertiary priority. They were more concerned with the making sure everyone was comfortable and had enough to drink and enough stuff at the barbecue than they were about the actual purpose of the field training exercise. Now, the purpose, to get back into training here now, the purpose of an FTX or field training exercise is to train in simulated combat conditions. So when you're going out there, that's the time you're going to test your ideas on how you anticipate to set up and survive in the field in a worst case scenario. Always try to make your training worse than what it would be in real life. Make it harder. So that way, when you come across a similar situation in real life, if a conflict does occur, you can handle it because you were able to handle it during training. That's one of the reasons why the military makes the training centers, like at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, the CMTC in Hohenfels, if I remember correctly, or Grafenwehr, Germany. Why they make the training at those places far worse than what you could actually encounter in combat is so that you're prepared for the worst that could potentially occur. That's why you always get your butt kicked at a training center by the OPFOR, because they go above and beyond. Now, this is going to be divided into 2, maybe 3 videos, I don't know. First here I'll give you a general schedule. The second video I'll give you somewhat of a map, an overview of, generally how the stuff might look. Okay, first off, your FTX starts a week to 2 weeks before the actual training event, because that is when the leaders must recon the sites, the main site and the alternate. Always have 2, potentially 3. The reason for it is things can happen. Now, if you're saying that, well, we always go to our training site, the same place that we train at each month, things can happen. If there's been storms that have moved through recently, it may have knocked down trees across your roads to get in there, across your trails. If there's some type of creek, some type of river, stream, anything like that, or marsh, pond or anything, if you've had a lot of rain, it could have flooded out the area. You also have to check to make sure if any type of very territorial animals may have moved into the area, or insects. You could get in there and find out the site that you usually use for your FTXs. There's now a giant bee's nest there, or wasp nest. And that particular breed is very territorial and will not like it that you're in the area. And if you have people that are allergic to bee stings, that is a very bad thing. So recon the sites a week to 2 weeks ahead of time, preferably 2 weeks ahead of time. That way, if you have to go to an alternate site because your primary choice is not suitable for one reason or another, you have time to check out that alternate just as thoroughly before the FTX begins. And then notify your leaders about that change. Now, FTX -1, the day before, Friday evening. If you are doing a force on force in this exercise, you're doing missions against an OPFOR. Really, they should deploy the evening before. They should go out there the night before, the evening before, so have them report in, say, I don't know, 1800 hours, 1900 hours, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, Friday evening, and then they deploy to the training area. So they can get in there, they can check stuff out, and they can prep the area. That's what their setup is. They're not just putting in their little assembly area, patrol base camp, hide position. They're also prepping the area. Maybe they're putting in some simulated landmines for the people to find or potentially set off. There are paintball type mines, including improvised ones that people make that you can step on. Activates a CO2 cartridge and it sprays out water from the mines, getting the person all wet, simulating that, hey, they just set off the mine. You could be putting out booby traps and stuff. You could be putting out different types of indicators that a larger enemy unit has moved through the area, whatever is required for your scenario. They should prep for that the evening before, because they do not know for certain when the main body will come in the next day. Now, day of the FTX, Saturday morning, the unit arrives at the rally point. I recommend you have a location that they park their vehicles at, and then they get transported in mass, or they hump it in. They throw the rucks on their back and walk it into the field site. So maybe you're going to some farm. Okay, you're dropping off the vehicles there, parking them out of the way where they're not going to cause the farmer problems. If he's not part of the unit, maybe he's part of your militia auxiliary. You're parking the vehicles off to the side. You're doing your preps, and then you're going to hump it into, say, the back part of his land somewhere. Maybe he's got a area that he can't till because it's, too wooded, dips down into next to a river or something like that, or down into a gully, or it's a giant hill or something. An area that he can't plow, but will work for training. So the unit arrives at the rally point. The quartering party will leave soon after, so they need to basically be ready when they show up. When they arrive, they'll link up with the appropriate person in the unit leadership. They'll get their final orders, their final instructions. They'll be given their strip maps or grid coordinates, however you're going to do it. Then they move out along the anticipated route that the unit is going to use. They're reconning that, checking to make sure that the route is clear, and then they're going to the field site where the assembly area is going to be at, and they're going to do their quartering party procedures. Now, as the quartering party deploys and they're moving forward, the main body does their final preparations. They're making sure everyone's shown up, everyone's got the gear, everyone's got their supplies. A very, very common thing I have come across with FTXs in the militia is people forget to bring water, believe it or not. They'll show up, they'll have their canteens, but they'll forgot to actually fill them before they came in. So that's a good time to go through, check, make sure everyone's got their stuff, make sure that they got their weapon, make sure they have the appropriate ammo for that exercise. You know, if you're doing a force on force, you know, maybe you're going to be using blanks. So make sure that they got blanks, and make sure the blanks are separate from the live ammunition. That they're going to be in different magazines, and the magazines will be marked so you can tell the difference during training. Make sure they had their food, make sure they had their water, make sure they had the appropriate snivel gear. Snivel gear, for those of you that do not know what it is, that's this gear that you use when it rains or when it gets cold or windy. And when I mean windy, I mean, you know, blow you over type winds. Stuff that you can barely talk to each other, you know, while it's raging. There's certain parts of the country that are like that. Now, after a set amount of time, the main body will deploy. And while they're deploying, they're moving forward. At that point is ideally when the quartering party is done with checking the route, or almost done with checking the route, and they're at the assembly area and they're doing their quartering party procedures. They're checking it out. For questions on how to do that, I did do videos. It's under the base camp playlist. Main body comes in. They arrive. They set up at the assembly area after doing the link up with the quartering party, going through, doing the correct procedures, getting assigned their areas and stuff. Now, depending on the mission the OPFOR has, maybe they're going to ambush the main body as it's coming in. Or maybe they're just going to monitor them. They may not know the exact route the main body's coming in. So they're out there, they're patrolling, they're setting up their little LPOPs, watching for the main body, finding out where they're at. Once they locate them, they follow them to find out where the assembly area is at. When they get to the assembly area, the OPFOR monitors to see what they're doing. See how they're setting the stuff up. Where is stuff being set up? And they're doing it as covertly as possible. They do not want to be seen. So have those binos with you. Have those spotting scopes. If you have acoustic monitoring equipment, the little directional mics, this would be a great time to try them out and use them too. Monitor those conversations going on inside the assembly area so you find out more information. The OPFOR is trying to build up as much info as they can on this enemy force that has moved into their territory. And if need be, maybe they're going to start some additional preps at that time. Maybe at that time is when they're going to shift some of those mines because they put them in the wrong location. They know that, hey, the main body's going to go out this way to do missions now because we heard it on the directional mic. So let's put some mines over here. Or put in some hasty obstacles. set up some hasty ambushes and stuff. Now, ideally, your prep of the assembly area should take no more than 1 to 2 hours, and that includes doing your local security, digging your fighting positions, setting up your sleep areas, setting up your TOC, your Tactical Operations Center, setting up your chow area, setting up your latrines, setting up your supply points, whatever has to be done. Setting up your water points, all that stuff. Then you jump in and you start conducting your training and your missions. Now, I highly recommend you have a particular scenario or bundle of tasks that you are going to be covering at the field training exercise. And FTX is a great time to test people's retention of knowledge of what they've learned in previous meetings and even previous field training exercises to see if they've still retained that knowledge. So make sure to incorporate that in the training. Now, if you're doing an Op 4 exercise, you're probably going to have to designate a few people from the unit as your OCs, as your observer controllers. They're going to be monitoring the situation. They're the ones that are going to be the judge, jury, and executioner. You know, a firefight happens, they're the one that says, okay, you got hit, you got hit, you got hit. And if you have casualty cards, they're the one that issues out the casualty cards. Casualty cards are a very useful thing. I've been able to find them on eBay. I had gotten a giant box of them a few years ago. Look them up, see if you can get a deck and incorporate them in your training. They're really useful for the force on force stuff to add that additional level. Now go through, conduct your training, conduct your missions. If you're going to do a particular training that the entire unit has to attend, have the site selected for that training be away from the assembly areas, the patrol bases, the hide positions and stuff. And then everyone knows that, hey, we're going to this location, you know, game off. We're not doing force on force right now. We're going to meet over here. We're going to conduct the following training. Then we're all going to dismiss, and then so many minutes later, it's game on. So once the training missions and that stuff are done for the day, late into the evening before nighttime, that's when you're going to start your guard duty. And if you have missions going on at night, like ambushes or patrols, they will occur. You're trying to conduct everything along the lines as similar as possible as what you would anticipate doing in wartime conditions. Now, wild edibles. I got to throw this in there. Wild edibles, fish, small game, and that stuff. If you are going to be using that as part of your training, make sure to have the time set aside during the day for allowing for that. So maybe when you're doing your assembly area setup, you have people going out putting in a few snares, and when they're doing it, make sure that they have someone with them pulling security, because you can get jumped by your Op 4. So they go in, they put in their snares, put in their little fish traps, their trot lines, whatever they're practicing. If they're gathering wild edibles, you have a foraging party that goes out, gathers the stuff up, and brings it back. And then I suggest your evening chow. Have that as the time that your field mess team, if you have a cook designated for the unit, the cook has to prepare that stuff for the meal, and it gets issued out to everyone using their mess gear. They eat it. They then clean their mess gear. Once it's dry, they pack it away for the day. So you get one hot chow in you, at least one. So that way your cook gets used to making that large meal for everyone inside the base camp. And if you have to do it on a rotation because, hey, one squad is out doing a mission or one platoon is out doing a mission, well, you feed whoever's in the assembly area first, making sure that you had the food set aside for those guys when they come back in, so they get hot chow after they arrive. Now, you could do attacks during the night, have your Op 4 come in, launch some raids, stuff like that, see if they can sneak into perimeter and stuff. Maybe give them a particular mission to steal X number of rifles. You know, some scenario that they're given by the commanding officer or the company first sergeant. That stuff's going on at nighttime. That way you make sure that your guard duty is going on, no one's asleep on shift. Sunday morning. Before the sun comes up, you start stand 2. Stand 2 is where the entire unit gets up and starts pulling guard duty from their positions. Now, the reason for this, early in the morning and as the sun's going down in the evening are historically the times when attacks usually occur. So what the U.S. military does is what's called stand 2. About a half hour to an hour before the sun gets up, everyone gets up, gets their gear on, goes out, get in their position, and they stay in that position till about a half hour to an hour after the sun is up. Once that's done, they leave their people on guard duty that are still supposed to be on guard duty at the time. Everyone goes back, does their chow, does their hygiene, whatever needs to be done. So stand 2 is over with. We're doing our guard duty. Maybe we still got some training and missions going on in the morning. Those training, those missions get launched, they get accomplished. After the missions are done, everyone comes back to their appropriate assembly areas and they do their site breakdown. They fill in those fighting positions, pull in the early warning devices, pull in the mines, the booby traps and that stuff, tear down the obstacles. They get everything broken down and packed up so that it can be humped back out. And then, once the training exercise is over with at a set time, the Op 4 comes in, you guys meet at a particular location, and you conduct your AAR, your after action review. Do not neglect the AAR. That is a great tool for learning where you screwed up as a unit and as individuals so that you can improve in the future. The more you sweat during training, the less you bleed during war. So you want to catch these little mistakes now during training and not let the enemy catch them in wartime. During an AAR, you cover what went right, what went wrong, how can we improve. I do have a video that I linked to over on Patreon that you can watch on how to conduct an AAR. It can be boring to watch, boring to do, but it's extremely valuable. When you do the AAR, you want the Op 4 part of it. You want everyone there. And remember, the AAR is not an attack on the individual. You're just pointing out deficiencies. One thing we used to do in the military is if you made a complaint about something that was wrong, you had to come up with a way to improve it, how to fix it. That cuts down on people that just like to complain all the time, who complain about everything for no reason. After your AAR is done, that is when you will put out your information for the next month's training, do your little quote-unquote final formation, and then people get dismissed. And always remember, safety is priority above everything else. Everything must be done safely at all times. Now, some general notes here to go with this. First off, if you're bringing RVs and campers and that's what you're staying in, it's not an FTX, it's a camp out. If you are bringing your family and they're coming along but they're not participating in the exercise in some way, it's not an FTX, it's a camp out. If you're coming in, you're just pitching your shelters and then you spend the entire day at the range shooting, it's not an FTX. You're just having fun at a firearms range. That's all. If you are allowing drinking alcohol and it's unrestricted, more than just a quick morale and welfare thing, you're allowing people to get drunk, it's not an FTX. Okay? Now, another note. Ammunition. When you are conducting force-on-force part of the exercise, the main body is against the Op-4 during the training. No live ammunition should be carried, especially in your weapon and in your ammo pouches. Now, you may have your loaded magazines inside your rucksack, but there should be none on you that you can grab by mistake. Always make sure that that is packed away. So before each mission and that stuff, before you go to deploy out in the field and that stuff, you're going through, you're checking those magazines. You're making sure they are loaded only with blanks. And if you're using blanks, make sure that the person has the appropriate blank adapter on their weapon and it is mounted correctly. Using duct tape and a bolt in the barrel does not count as a blank adapter. There are appropriate blank adapters out there for pretty much any firearm you can come up with. And if it's a bolt action, you don't have to really worry as much about a blank adapter, but there are some blank adapters out there for military issue bolt actions. They're kind of hard to find, but they were distributed as kind of a safety thing by the appropriate military that used that weapon. So check that ammunition, make sure no live rounds. And then when you're going to do your live fire parts of the exercise, you're going to a range, going to a shoot house, whatever it happens to be, that is when you make sure the blank adapters come off the weapons, they get put inside the pocket or inside the butt pack or the assault pack or whatever. The magazines with the blanks get taken out of the ammo pouches, they get set off to the side, and then that's when the magazines with live ammo gets loaded into your ammo pouches and in your weapon when it's the appropriate time. So at that point, when everyone gets up there to the firing line and that stuff, the leader once again checks each ammo pouch, each magazine, make sure that the correct ammunition is loaded in it, ready to go for that part of the iteration. And then once that live fire is done, once that range is done, everyone goes through, takes those magazines that still have live rounds in them, pulls them out, packs them away again. And then the leader goes through, makes sure everyone has those magazines swapped out. They have the blanks back inside their pouches, back inside their weapon, the blank adapters back on the weapon. All live magazines, all live rounds are loaded inside bags where they cannot be reached easily. Because you don't want that mistake of you're doing a force-on-force exercise and someone accidentally grabs a magazine loaded with live ammunition instead of blanks. It does happen in the military. People get hurt that way. Seriously. That's why you must stay on that, have very positive control on that when you're doing those changeouts. Another thing that someone brought up to me here within the last 24 hours. If you're conducting a live fire exercise and you're the safety officer, your rear end should not be in front of the muzzles of those weapons, especially when they're loaded. At most, you'll be alongside the firer. You should not be in front of. I don't care if you're off on the side of the firing line. You should not be forward of the firing line when the weapons are loaded, especially when they're pulling triggers. Because guess what? Someone can pull that trigger and accidentally swing that weapon in that safety officer's direction by mistake, and then that safety officer gets shot. Don't do that. So, if someone forgets a piece of gear, if it is vitally needed for that training exercise, if there is time, they should go back and get it before the main body rolls out. If it is not needed, or someone else can cover down, give them something to replace it and stuff for that exercise, then do that. Remember that your FTX, you're trying to conduct it the same way you would during war. So make sure you have your stuff with you, it's packed, it's ready to go, and then rock and roll, do your training. Try to make your training as realistic as possible. Your OP4, if they are simulating a particular group or country or conventional military, they should have the appropriate uniforms if possible, the appropriate gear if possible, the appropriate weapons if possible. And they definitely should learn the tactics that they're trying to simulate. So if they're simulating being members of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Antifa, or they're simulating that they're North Korean Special Forces, or that they're European Army Forces, they should do their best to simulate that, especially on the tactics level, on how they conduct their missions against the Blue Four, the main body of the unit. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.